Hey everyone, I know in the last video I said that when I pick this series up again we'd focus on attacks, feats, or even spells, but I see enough desire down in the comments to go over saving and loading data to cover part 1 of a 2-part series on saving, which is local storage. Now, a couple of disclaimers before we hop into it. Number 1, I know that this process can be much more efficiently handled using jQuery and event listeners, as well as cycling through form data instead of the way I'm about to do it, but as I've said many times, I want to stick with vanilla JavaScript so that we're not dependent on external libraries or frameworks. Bootstrap excluded, but of course that's much less demanding than jQuery, and come on, we gotta have formatting. Number 2, local storage comes with a couple of caveats. For example, if you delete your cache or your browser history, your data is gone. You can't get it back. You can only store one character sheet at a time, and you can't share data across multiple computers. It is exactly what it says it is, local storage. Now in part 2, we'll pull in some PHP and some server-side scripting to talk about storing characters on an external server so that you can access them remotely. Number 3, and finally, for ease of use, I won't be storing all of our values in local storage, and the order in which we handle each step of the process matters quite a bit because we don't want to accidentally overwrite our own stats while loading the data, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment. So let's hop in. Okay, we've got our character sheet up here, and as you can see, we've got our preview along the bottom, we've got our HTML on the left and JavaScript on the right, with all of our methods for generating our character stats. We're going to put our new functions at the top of this list because in practice, we are probably going to call them before we call any of the other methods. And you'll see what I mean, because for instance, the first thing that we would do when we load the page is get stored values. And then let's go ahead and create another empty method, set local storage. So these are going to be our two methods that we use to save and load data accordingly. Now, the first one we're going to dig into, like I said, the order of how we do this is going to matter quite a bit. So I'm going to put in some comments here, and you're welcome to put them in if you want. If not, you don't have to, but it's just going to help us stay organized to make sure that we are doing things in the proper order of operations, you know. PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, whatever your mnemonic is for remembering order of operations. So, first comment is going to be we want to save our player level. Second comment, we'll go a couple lines down and say we are going to save our ability scores. And you'll notice that the way we're handling this is we're basically going, top to bottom, left to right. We're going to save armor and shield info. Then we are going to save hit points and hit dice. And finally, we're going to save our skills. All right, let's go ahead and save that up. And the next thing we want to do is create a button in order to save our data. We don't want to do anything automatically just yet. We want to be able to trigger this manually so that we can do it for testing purposes. Eventually, you would want this to be set up so that every time a value changes, you just automatically go ahead and save that to local storage. And I'll show you how to do that at the end of this. But for now, what we're going to do is just add a little line break in here. We're going to create another div. Excuse the preview breaking every now and again when we set this up. And we're actually going to go ahead and create a button, just a save button. We'll call it save data. We're going to want to format this a bit, right? So, well, for one thing, let's do this. we'll go class text center. That'll center our button in the column. The button class is going to be, oh, too many quotes there. The button class is obviously going to be a button. And just to give it a different color, we'll call it button secondary. So there's our save data button. And then let's go ahead and just copy that whole chunk again. And we will create a load data button. Now again, we are creating buttons here so that we can call the functions manually for debugging purposes, but at the end I'll show you how to trigger these automatically. So we are going to set this up so that we actually call our new functions. Do that a little bit. As you guys know, I am prone to typos. So there you go. Save data calls the set local storage function, and load data loads the get stored values function. So hopping back over into our JavaScript, let's go ahead and start storing some values. It really is as simple as saying local storage. Make sure that you're camel casing, so lowercase l, uppercase s, set item. And then in our parentheses, we're going to basically create a local variable, and we're going to call it player level. Put a comma after the parentheses, and then we want to snag a value from our document. So we're going to do the same thing we always do with our getter, is document.getElementById. And you'll notice that I went ahead and kept the variable the same name so that we can copy and paste it, and we know exactly which variables are going where, and .value. So it really is that simple to store a variable to local storage. You just say local storage set item, you create the variable that you want it to call in local storage, and then the second part of it is the value that you want to store that variable as. Now, like I said before, you could just cycle through all of the different fields in this form and run that exact same script. But like I said, we're not going to store all of the variables in here, and I will show you why. First, let's go ahead and copy that line, and we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with our ability scores. Now, if you remember, you always have to go with whatever you called the variable on your HTML side is what you have to call it over here. Well, you don't have to call it that. I'm doing that way in order to keep things nice and organized and make sure that we're not mixing variables. And that's our ability scores. Now, like I said, we are not going to store all of our values. We are not actually going to store our ability modifiers. The reason we don't have to store them is because when we load them, all we're going to do is call our update modifiers function from that line. So when we load our stored values, we can load the ability scores and then generate the modifiers using the script that we've already written. It just saves us an extra step, and it keeps our code a little more lean. It is getting pretty long here, but I think that it's going to be more efficient than just storing everything and loading everything all at once. Same thing for our armor and our shield. And then we need to do the same thing with our current HP. As well as our max HP. All right. Now, the only thing that is going to be slightly different about our skills, as I mentioned before, we're not going to store every single skill value because that would be a waste, considering that all of our skills can be auto-calculated based on our ability modifiers. The only thing that we need to store is the data in these checkboxes, because that will denote whether we get our proficiency bonus or not. So all we're going to do is get that checkbox, which we have abbreviated to acro proficiency, anim proficiency, etc. And instead of getting the value, we are going to get whether or not that box is checked. So now I will fast forward to when I am done copy and pasting this and renaming every single one. Let's do all that. Whew, okay, so finally got all the skill proficiencies listed in. It took me a while because I forgot some of these abbreviations that I used. And again, we are only getting the checkboxes. We don't need to get the values because we are just going to have those auto-calculate for us. And that's really all that we need from the existing sheet. The only thing we have to do now is actually generate those stored values on command. So again, we're going to comment out what we're going to do, which is set the player level first. And then we are going to set ability scores. Set our armor class. Set our HP and hit dice. And finally, set skills. Now, to load our stored variables, it really is as simple as setting our form field values equal to the local storage variables. So we're going to do our usual document get element by ID. In this case, we are trying to get the player level. We want to change the value. We're going to set that equal to local storage dot, instead of set item, we're going to get item. And since we use the same variable names, it is as simple as putting in player level, close it up with a semicolon, and that will load in our player level value. The next thing we are going to want to do is actually call our update proficiency bonus function. Like I said, we don't need to store those variables to local storage if we can just generate them dynamically using the scripts that we've already written. So we're going to do the same thing over here. Let's go ahead and copy that line. And we're going to rename this one strength score. And strength score. We're going to do that for all of our ability scores. And like I said before, we don't have to store any values. We're just going to call our update modifiers function. Up next, we're going to set our armor class. Again, we're going to get our equipped armor. And our shield equip, whether or not we have a shield. And then we're going to call our equip armor function. Now remember, you have to pass in the variable of equipped armor in order to get that to work. Finally, we are going to set our current HP. Set our max HP. We will set our hit dice. And we will set our hit die. All right, so the skills are the only thing that's going to be handled a little bit differently, and the reason for that is that these checkbox variables are Boolean variables, which means they are true-false statements, versus values, which can be just strings. It's just plain text, right? So local storage can only store plain text values. So if we were to try and set our values of the skills, our skill proficiencies, as true or false, they would always return false, because true is not the same as true in quotation marks as a string of text. So we actually have to run a little function on these called json.parse. And what that's going to do is it's going to translate our string true or false into a Boolean true or false. So it turns one variable into another type of variable so that we can actually use it. And I'll show you what that looks like right now. We're going to say document get element by ID. We're going to get our, let's start with the acro prof dot checked. We're going to set that equal to json.parse, and then wrap it up in parentheses here and say local storage be sure to spell it right, and we're going to get item, and same thing, acro prof. And that's that. So basically what's happening here is when we stored our variable, we stored it as acroprof, the value of acroprof equals the word true. When we click it, it becomes the word true. So if we were to turn it into a text field, if we just said local storage get item acroprof, it would return the word true. What we're doing is we're taking that and converting it into the variable true or false. So now we have to do that with all of our other skills. All right, so that is all of our skill proficiencies loaded in, and up next, you got it, we are going to call our set skills function, and that is going to generate our skill values based on the proficiencies. So, moment of truth, let's save it up, and let's put in some dummy values and see if we can't save and load them. Let's go ahead and bump our player level up to 5. The reason I want to do that is because I want to get that proficiency bonus and make sure that it shows. Let's put on some armor, equip a shield. We're going to make a tanky character. Low intelligence, low wisdom, but he knows how to chat up the ladies. We're going to make sure that he's got 35 hit points, which is low for a level 5 player, but we'll set him at 24 HP, maybe give him a D10 hit die, say that he's only got 2 of those, and let's just check a couple of skill proficiencies to make sure that he's got those proficiency bonuses in there. We're going to go over to our Save Data button, save it up, and then refresh the page. As you can see, everything has been reset to 0, but if we click the Load Data button, okay, that did not work as intended. Sorry about that, but it's probably important that you know this because you will have the same error if you do the same thing that I did, which was make a mistake. So what I had to do was I went in and changed the name of the function for equipping the shield because you don't want your function to be the same name as the ID of your of the field that you're trying to change. And so what was happening was my function was returning an error because it was saying there's no my function here, sorry, was returning an error because it was saying, oh, well, there's no function called that. So I just had to go in, change a few things around. So make sure that your function name is not the same as your field ID name on the shield equip, which if you followed my tutorial from last time, it is probably incorrect. So if you fix that up, then let's try and do this one more time. Let's save everything up. And we're going to bump up our player level to level 5. We're going to make a tanky boy with a nice high constitution, high strength. Low intelligence. We'll go ahead and give him some hide armor. Make sure that he's got a shield equipped. We'll give him 24 out of, let's say, 50 hit points. His hit dice, we'll say, he's got a D8, and we'll say that he's got 3 hit dice left. And then, like I said, we're going to just check a couple of skills and make sure that he's got some proficiency bonus in those. We're going to go ahead and click the Save Data button. And then let's refresh the page and load data. And that's what we were looking for, is we've got our player level, the proficiency bonus updates to match the player level, all of our ability scores and modifiers are correct. We have our missing hit points, so that way, if you're trying to save a current state of a player, instead of saving them at their default state, you can save them as injured, and our skill proficiencies are still stored. All right, so that's that. The only thing we have to talk about now is how to get these values to load when the page loads instead of having to click a button to load them. So in order to do that, what we're going to need to do is create a body tag, because the onload event can only be attached to the body of a web page. So we're going to say onload, and if I don't get any typos, we're going to copy and paste our get stored values function. And that way, when this page loads, close up our body, we are going to get our values. Let's save it up. And what we're going to do is just refresh the page. And as you can see, all of our values are stored instead of having to click the load data button. So now, let's say, for instance, you wanted to save data every time you made a change to any of these fields. All you'd have to do is then call your set local storage function every time something changed. So if you want, you can call it at the bottom of something that is like a trickle-down effect. So for instance, I know for a fact that when I change an ability score, the modifier will automatically change to match the ability score, and then the skills will automatically change to reflect the modifier. So I don't need to put So I don't need to call that function on every step. I can just go to set skills, and at the bottom of set skills, we call our set local storage function. And so then I know that every time we change a skill, it's going to update that in our local storage. Similarly, if we want to say every time we take damage, we can set local storage, and that way we will change our hit points accordingly. Now, you may or may not want to implement this particular type of functionality. I'm going to leave it off just because we are still going to be debugging this, and we don't want to have to go through saving and loading everything on every single run of this sheet, right? Let's go down here and get rid of this closed body tag. So yeah, I don't want to be calling all of these functions, all of the time. At least not here, but when we use it in practice, obviously having those autosave functions is going to be massively helpful. So that concludes part 1 on saving and loading character data in JavaScript using local storage. In the next video, we will use PHP, which is a server-side scripting language, in order to store our character data on an external server so that you can access it from any computer as long as you're connected to the internet. As always, the code pen to this document is going to be in the description below so that you can copy and paste the code yourself. Thank you guys in the comments so much for your suggestions on this video. I hope that it answered the first part of your questions. If you are liking this RPG-related programming content, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know this was a long one. I appreciate you sticking with me. I will catch you all later.